My name is Kinsley. I'm 36 years old, living and working in Boston. I once thought that as long as I worked hard, sacrificed, and stayed considerate, sooner or later I would be recognized. But on my father's 60th birthday, in the middle of a luxurious banquet hall where relatives and friends raised their glasses in celebration, I learned a bitter lesson that nearly choked me. My parents ceremoniously handed my younger brother Ethan an inheritance contract for the family company, a business worth over $40 million. And me, the daughter who had dedicated 14 years of her life to that very company, was given a thin, meaningless envelope. Inside, a supermarket gift card worth $50. No one clapped for me. No one questioned it. The whole room seemed in agreement with their choice. I stood, left the table in silence, but that exact moment was the beginning of a journey no one in my family could have imagined. Have you ever felt like you were just a substitute in your own life story? Stayed quiet for so long until one day you couldn't take another minute of it? If you've ever felt overlooked, diminished, even after giving your all, leave a comment below, hit like if this story touches you, and don't forget to follow this channel to continue with me beyond the doors of that banquet. A journey no longer about sacrifice, but about standing up. I don't remember how I walked out of that banquet hall. I only clearly remember the thunderous applause behind me when my father, in his custom navy suit, declared, "Our family is proud to pass full control of the company to Ethan, our only son, the most deserving one." People applauded, raised champagne glasses. My mother stood beside him, eyes sparkling as if she had just seen a dream come true. Ethan smiled brightly, nodding like a politician about to take office, holding up the leather envelope stamped with the company seal. And me. I held a thin, white envelope, flimsy as tissue paper. Inside was a $50 supermarket gift card, the store sticker still clinging to the back. No explanation. No guilty glance. Only my mother tilting her head, whispering, "You've always been good at managing on your own, Kinsley. This is just symbolic." I forced a polite smile, the kind I had mastered after more than 3 decades. But my throat tightened. My eyes blurred, as though the entire room had been swallowed in a heavy fog of disappointment. I stood. The chair made a soft squeak, too quiet for anyone to turn. Only Ethan raised his brows slightly, shrugged, then went back to chatting with a group of my father's old classmates. I walked past them as if I had never existed. The hallway was cool. I leaned against the wall, drawing a deep breath to keep from breaking down. Through the large glass doors, the back garden glowed with golden light spilling over old rose bushes. Everything looked perfect, just as my mother always wanted. But I was crumbling right in the middle of that perfection. A voice called softly behind me. "Kinsley?" I turned. It was Miss Celeste, my mother's old friend, once my high school teacher. "Are you all right?" I nodded, as always. But when I saw her sincere eyes, the mask I wore cracked. "I don't think I belong in there anymore," I whispered. She stepped closer, resting a hand gently on my shoulder. "Your brother seems chosen as the heir, but I taught both of you, and I've never seen anyone work harder, quieter, more steadily than you." I turned away, not wanting her to see my eyes welling. Praise now felt like a belated consolation. I gave up nearly all of my youth to keep that company standing. I stayed late, fixed every design error in projects Ethan botched. Not once was I mentioned in any press release. "You deserve so much more, Kinsley." I stayed silent. Words like that couldn't soothe anymore. I needed more than sympathy. I needed truth. She paused, then lowered her voice. "I heard you were the one who paid off the bank loan 5 years ago to stop the company from being seized. Is that true?" I looked at her, not hiding my shock. "Who told you that?" "Anyone truly following this company knows." I said nothing more. My chest felt packed with stone. That was the loan I covered from my own savings. No contract, no receipt. Just my father's desperate plea one tense evening. He promised to repay. He never brought it up again. And tonight, he handed Ethan the entire company, as if all that effort had been Ethan's. I pulled out my phone, quietly typed a message to Harper. I need to get out of here. Soon. Message sent. I walked to the back garden, not returning to the banquet. The streetlight at the far end flickered faintly. I sat on a bench, staring into the dark. Laughter still spilled from the hall. Among them were people who once called me daughter. People who hugged me when I earned a scholarship. But clearly, not one of them was willing to place me on equal ground with Ethan. I was no longer that 20-year-old girl. No longer waiting for anyone to validate my worth. That was when I thought, enough. I stood. I didn't look back. I went inside, grabbed my purse, left the gift card on the buffet table beside a half-melted cheesecake. Then I left the party. Left the house I once called family. And inside me echoed only one vow. From now on, I will never let anyone define my worth through silence again. I drove home in silence. The road grew darker, trees sliding by like shapeless shadows. The radio hummed a slow jazz tune, but I couldn't hear it. My mind drained empty. Ethan's image beneath the spotlight, contract in hand, my parents smiling with pride, replayed endlessly like a film loop. That gift card still sat on the table, left behind as a clear refusal without words. I reached my apartment near midnight. The room was pitch dark, but I didn't turn on the lights. I slipped off my shoes, sank onto the sofa. No tears, no anger, just emptiness filling every crack in my chest. In that silence, memories crowded back uninvited. I remembered 8th grade, Ethan in 4th. The whole family vacationed in Santa Cruz. I begged my parents to stop by a used bookstore that had a poster for a signing by my favorite author. My mother said, "No time for that. Your brother wants the water park." So we spent the afternoon queuing under the sun just so Ethan could ride a new slide. I wasn't mad. I was used to waiting, used to giving way. Back then, I thought that's what an older daughter was supposed to do. In high school, I applied on my own for a summer study scholarship. I prepared the papers, wrote the essay, asked a teacher to proofread. When I was chosen for a 3-week program in Tokyo, my father just nodded. "Good. At least you can take care of yourself." My mother flipped straight to the expense log. No one asked if I needed help. I used wages from working at the school library to pay the travel fees not covered by the scholarship. Meanwhile, when Ethan was 17, my parents took him to London, renting a riverside apartment for 3 months to spark creativity before he applied to design school. He returned with an Italian leather bag, custom sneakers, and a portfolio of urban art experiences my mother displayed down the hallway. I still remember her telling a guest that day, "Ethan needs exposure to beauty. Kinsley is different. She already has direction built into her." It sounded like I was some programmed machine requiring no nurture. I pushed on quietly. Finished college on a full scholarship, worked 20 hours a week at the design lab, then landed my first job at the family construction firm. No welcome party, no special nameplate, just an email from HR. "Seat Kinsley at the empty desk on the 3rd floor." I accepted. I thought working in my field was enough. I believed if I did well, they would see. At 29, my father approached me after work, face tense. The company faced a bank problem. A loan was being called early because Ethan misclassified spending. Without funds, the bank could seize assets. "This stays in the family. Don't tell anyone. I know you have savings. Can you help?" "Just a few months, I'll pay back fully." I stared at the man who once taught me to fold clothes in preschool, who picked me up in the rain. In that moment, I didn't think. I withdrew 6 years of savings, over $92,000, wired it to his account. No contract, no receipt, just trust. Months passed, no mention. A year passed, I swallowed it. 5 years later, in tonight's banquet, I heard him say, "We are proud to hand the company to Ethan, who has stood by us in every major decision." I sat up straight in the dark. My chest burned, like a mountain pressing down. Years of endurance, years of hope. But to them, I was just the silent assistant, never meant for the spotlight. My phone buzzed. "Harper," I answered. "You home already?" "Yeah." "Something wrong?" "You left so early." I sighed. "I don't even know where to start. Here's what. Take tomorrow off. Fly to Boston with me. Just a few days. Change the air." I stayed silent. Harper was my college roommate, the only one who saw me pulling all-nighters, who knew how many times my mother called to dump party chores for Ethan without thanks. You need to stand up, Kinsley, not for revenge, to rewrite your story. I didn't answer right away, but inside something stirred. Faint, but clear. It was time to stop being silent. I couldn't sleep. All night I lay staring in the dark, the gift card glaring in my mind like it still pressed on my chest, weighted with 36 years of waiting for respect. Near 4 a.m., I sat up, turned on the light. Nothing left to wait for, no conversation worth continuing, no explanation worth hearing. I dragged a suitcase from under the bed, opened the closet. I didn't pack much, a few business outfits, a thick knit coat, heels I only wore to big meetings. I folded carefully, not rushed but resolute, as though my hands had decided long before, waiting only for my heart to catch up. On my desk, I left a short letter, less than a page. No accusations, no list of grievances. Simply, I need my own space. Don't look for me. Don't call. When I'm ready, I'll reach out. I set the house key on top, beside the dried lavender my mother always replaced every Sunday. The bouquet had faded. I wheeled my suitcase down the dim hall, past the blinking coffee maker timer showing 5:58 a.m. My mother still asleep. My father likely still drunk from the banquet. I stepped out the door without looking back. My old car waited by the curb, windshield fogged with a white veil. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine. My phone lit up. 2 missed calls from Mom, 4 from Dad. A new message from Ethan, "You're too sensitive. Yesterday was my honor, not a time for you to make a scene." I deleted it, silenced the phone, dropped it into the console. I drove out of town without glancing at the familiar sign. Dawn's blaze streaked the March sky orange. The road stretched east, straight to Boston, where Harper was waiting. We used to be roommates for 4 years in college. Harper was the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and, within 10 minutes, make everyone want to tell her their life stories. I was the one who sat quietly in the corner, listening, nodding, and remembering. She was also the first person who noticed that I could read blueprints as if they were sheet music, and she pulled me into the engineering department's research group. When I told her I planned to return to work at my family's company, Harper frowned. "Are you sure about this? You're a builder of bridges, Kinsley, not someone meant to follow old footprints." I laughed back then. I thought I was doing the right thing. Turns out I was only retreating further into the shadows. I reached the outskirts of Boston just before 7 p.m. The sky was still faintly lit. Rows of red brick houses with gray roofs slid past my window like scenes from a film I had once watched during college, but never noticed this clearly before. Harper was already standing at the front door, wrapped in a long charcoal cardigan, holding a glass of wine. She waved, her smile gentle but full of empathy. I stopped the car, opened the door. The crisp, cold air rushed into my lungs, waking something inside me that had been asleep too long. "Welcome to the world without Ethan," Harper said, pulling my suitcase from my hand. No supermarket gift cards, no inheritance contracts tossed around like candy, just you and a future as clean as a blank page. I chuckled, my voice raspy after a long day on the road. How long have you been preparing for this? I asked. Harper led me into her warm second-floor apartment. The kitchen light already on, the faint scent of lemongrass drifting in the air. About 6 years, she said, half joking, half serious. But it doesn't matter, you're here now, that's what counts. The living room was small, but tasteful, decorated with abstract paintings Harper had made while waiting for her first job. A light brown sofa sat near the gas fireplace. In the spare room off the hall, a single bed was already made, the blanket and pillows neat like a hotel. Stay as long as you need, she said, setting a sleeping bag on the table. This is home. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling slightly, not from exhaustion, but from a gratitude too deep to name. My phone buzzed. I opened it absent-mindedly. 3 missed calls from Dad, a message from Mom. You made your father's blood pressure rise. How could you walk out at a time like this? Not a word asking where I was, not a single line wondering if I was okay. I locked the screen, placed the phone face down on the table. Harper came in with 2 mugs of hot cocoa, placing one in my hands. What do you want to do tomorrow? She asked, her voice light as the breeze. I looked out the window. Boston at night glittered with lights like a brand new map unfolding before me. I don't know yet, I replied. But it won't start with apologizing for breathing. Harper nodded, raising her mug. Then let's start there. The next morning, Boston sunlight slipped through white curtains, glowing across the polished wooden floor of the small living room. Birds chirped from the nearby park. I sat in an armchair, cradling the hot coffee Harper had just brewed, feeling warmth spread from my chest to my throat. It felt like I was coming alive again after a winter that had lasted for years. Harper stepped out of the kitchen, her hair tied high, a laptop in her hand. She sat next to me and opened a PDF already bookmarked. You once said you wanted to return to architecture, right? I nodded slightly. I haven't touched a real set of blueprints in over a year, just endless financial reports and material approvals for Ethan. She turned the screen toward me. This company's called Larkin and Blake. They're behind many urban redevelopment projects in New England. They're looking for someone temporary for a housing redevelopment project in South Boston. Temporary, but if you do well, they might consider long-term. I know someone there. I already sent your resume. I was surprised. When did you do that? Right after you texted me saying you were on your way here. I looked at her, momentarily speechless. Some relationships don't need noise or constant affirmations. They exist like breath, like a quiet foundation holding someone steady from collapse. 3 days later, I had an interview. Larkin and Blake's building stood in the city center, its glass facade reflecting pale blue, sky and passing birds. I walked inside, resume in hand, nerves tinged with both excitement and caution. I was experienced, but I still carried the fear of being the woman who had walked away from her family, cut off from everything familiar. The 6th-floor conference room was spacious, filled with natural light. I sat across from 3 people. One of them made me freeze for a moment. The man in the middle, tall with silver at his temples and sharp eyes, Harrison Moore. 10 years ago, he had been a judge for the national design competition I entered as a student. My project had made the top 5. But it was him who delivered the cold critique. Good design, but lacking identity. Solid technique, but no vision. I had lost 3 nights of sleep over that comment. He looked at me now, raising an eyebrow as he flipped through my resume. Kinsley Morgan, he said, glancing at the second page. Team lead on the Skybridge project in Seattle? I handled the primary structural work and coordinated the facade execution. I replied steadily. He nodded, expression unreadable. The interview moved quickly and clearly. They asked about experience managing coordination between design and development teams, how I handled sudden budget cuts, how I reacted to unreasonable client demands. I answered truthfully, without embellishment. I no longer needed to hide myself. At the end, Mr. Moore stood, extended his hand. "I remember your name," he said. "Now I also remember your grit." I shook his hand, unable to mask the mix of surprise and relief. His eyes no longer carried judgment. Instead, they held recognition, unspoken but real. That afternoon, Harper waited for me at a small cafe across the street. I sat down, my hair still damp from the mist outside. "How did it go?" she asked, sipping her tea. "Looks like they'll call back," I said, watching the traffic flow. And Harper, yeah? Harrison Moore was the one who once told me I lacked identity. Her brows lifted. "And now?" "Now," he said, "I have grit." Harper laughed, clinking her cup gently against mine. "What more could you need?" That evening, I received an email from Larkin and Blake. They invited me to take a 3-month contract as an architect on the riverfront housing redevelopment project, with extension depending on performance. I sat before the screen, hands resting on the keyboard but not typing. What I felt wasn't victory, it was rebirth. I typed my reply, "I accept. I'll start Monday." On my first Monday morning at the new office, I wore the clay-colored blouse Harper had picked out, buttoned my cuffs neatly, tied my hair high, and walked in not as someone testing the waters, but as someone returning to where she belonged. The workspace was simple, no nameplate, a wooden desk, a workstation, and a large glass board covered with sketches of the redevelopment site. I began reading, annotating, checking every specification and every line. By lunch, while most people headed out, I stayed behind, adjusting the scale of tree plantings to ensure enough sunlight without blocking accessibility paths. A young engineer named Daniel stopped by, glanced at the drawings, and said, "You've only just started, but it feels like you've been tied to this project since last year." I smiled. "I've been tied to rebuilding from the ground up longer than you think." He didn't fully understand, but he nodded and walked away. I returned to work. My hand slid along the ruler, drawing a straight line from point A to point B. A line not wavering, not needing anyone's permission to continue. I was building something not for my family, but for myself. 3 weeks after I started at Larkin and Blake, a thick envelope arrived by express delivery at the office. The courier asked if I needed to sign. Before I could answer, Daniel walked by from the meeting room, glancing at the envelope. "Looks legal," he joked, then left before I could reply. I held the envelope, a weight sinking into my chest with an uneasy premonition. A Seattle law firm's logo sat neatly in the corner. I didn't open it right away. I took it home, set it on the dining table, stared at it for minutes before sliding a letter opener across. Inside were 5 dense pages, packed with dry but unmistakable legal language. My family, or rather my father's company, demanded I repay the shares previously received during my time there. They called it special benefits granted before fulfilling long-term obligations. In other words, they wanted me to return the bonus I received 5 years ago, plus internal training costs totaling nearly $60,000. I let out a small laugh, not shocked exactly, but bitter all the same. I had never received shares, never signed any ownership document. The sums they listed were annual bonuses, the same kind any employee earns for doing their job. I pulled out my phone, snapped pictures of each page, sent them to Harper with a message. My parents hired a lawyer to reclaim things they never gave me. Not even 5 minutes later, Harper called. Her voice was steady, firm. "Don't respond. I'll send this to Alyssa, the lawyer I worked with when suing my old company. She's sharp, she won't be pushed around." I nodded, though she couldn't see. "Thank you. No need. They're just trying to scare you. That's the only weapon they have left." I stayed quiet a moment, then spoke slowly. "I think my father is desperate. And Ethan is too cowardly to face me, so he hides behind them. You have proof? Not clear yet, but I have a feeling, and maybe something's coming. That afternoon, I opened LinkedIn as usual, planning to check on a construction partner. The homepage flashed Ethan's post, written just hours earlier. In our hardest times, we learn who truly stands with us. Not everyone who shares our name shares our heart, but family remains sacred even when some forget that. Beneath the post was a photo of Ethan standing in the middle of an office, holding a laptop, with a technical drawing pinned to the wall behind him, a picture clearly staged. The comments were divided. Some praised him as decisive, while others simply wrote, "Family is always complicated." But I noticed that the accounts that liked it first were all people who used to work at my father's company. They knew who I was. They understood the hidden meaning in those vague lines. I closed the app. I wasn't angry, just struck by the truth of it. Ethan had never once dared to face things directly. My brother always played his games in the shadows, where someone else carried the consequences for him. The next night, I got a call from an unknown number in Seattle. At first, I didn't plan to answer, but something inside me pushed me to pick up. Kinsley Morgan? Yes, who's calling? My name is David Traynor. I used to be an accountant at Morgan Construction. I'm not sure if you remember me. I sat up straight. I remember. You left about a year ago, right? That's right. I was forced out. They said I violated financial confidentiality. But the Truth Island. I tried to warn Mr. Morgan about some irregularities in Ethan's books. I stayed silent, my heartbeat thudding in my throat. David lowered his voice. Ethan transferred money from the company's contingency fund into the account of a shell company, an LLC called Capstone Ventures. I found matches and invoices for a chain of restaurants Ethan personally invested in, but he listed them as client entertainment expenses. The total was over $280,000. I gripped the phone, my voice tight. Do you still have copies? I do. I backed everything up before they made me leave the office. And Kinsley, I'm not calling for revenge. I'm calling because you're the only one in that family who can face the truth without pretending it isn't there. I drew in a deep breath. The room suddenly felt too quiet. I can send you the documents, but I'd prefer to meet in person, if possible. I don't trust email for this. I agreed. We arranged to meet that weekend at a small cafe near South Station. After hanging up, I sat for a long while, my chest swirling with both turmoil and relief. The evidence was no longer just a suspicion. The truth was breaking through like a streak of light slipping past a heavy curtain. I walked to the bookshelf, pulled out an old technical notebook, the one where I had recorded every project I'd worked on. Between the sketches were short diary entries. I flipped to a middle page. The black ink words I had written 6 years earlier were still there. Never believe silence is the safest choice. Sometimes silence is the proof that you've abandoned yourself. I stared at the words for a long time, then I closed the book. This time I would not be silent. I spent most of my days in the office, eyes fixed on blueprints, hands constantly adjusting tiny details of the riverfront housing project. This project demanded not just solid technical expertise, but also cross-disciplinary coordination from construction and utilities to environmental infrastructure. The pace was relentless, but I felt one thing clearly. I was no longer trapped in my family's shadows. I didn't need permission from anyone to prove my ability. The more I worked, the sharper I became. Technical meetings were no longer places where I was interrupted or dismissed like before. What I said was heard. What I did was acknowledged. One Thursday afternoon, while I was adjusting the drainage system for the Western housing cluster, I was introduced to Jordan Reynolds, the environmental engineer overseeing ecological impact assessments. He was tall, lean, with silver-rimmed glasses and the calm gaze of someone who had spent years working in nature. "We'll need to work closely for the next few weeks," he said as he entered the technical meeting room carrying a thick folder. "The West Lot used to be a temporary landfill in the 60s. If it isn't handled carefully, it'll affect the groundwater." I nodded, opening the geological base map. "I have the soil stratification diagrams, but no official contamination report yet. Could you arrange sampling as soon as possible? I'll be on site with the survey team tomorrow. If you're free, join us." Jordan's tone wasn't showy, but it carried clear respect. From then on, we worked side by side. No grandstanding, no wasted words. Each of us had our strengths, and we respected each other's roles. The endless meetings became more efficient when we collaborated. I started noticing Jordan lingering at my drawings longer than others. Not to critique, but almost as if he was listening to something beneath the technical lines. One Saturday evening, Harper dragged me to a pottery class at the community art center that she had signed us up for. "You need something not tied to deadlines and blueprints," she declared, shoving a rough canvas apron into my hands. I laughed but went along. In the warm studio that smelled of clay and hummed with the steady spin of wheels, I sank my hands into cold clay, the sensation strange at first. The class had only 8 people. Everyone focused on their wheel, clumsy but relaxed. Harper sat beside me, smudges of clay on her cheek. "It's fine to mess up. Just don't keep everything locked in your head." I said nothing. I just bent over and let my hands guide the clay. For a brief moment, I felt lighter, as though the burdens from Seattle had never existed. As though I was reshaping myself out of something soft, unsteady, but capable of becoming new. The following week, Jordan invited me to lunch after a field survey. We sat in a small diner near a day park, where the menu was handwritten on a wooden board and the waitress knew exactly what the regulars wanted. "You work like someone who's carried entire projects on her shoulders," Jordan said as I set down my cup of tea. "I have," I replied, gazing out the window. "But no one remembers that." He didn't press. He just nodded slowly. Then he pulled a folded packet of papers from his jacket and set it on the table. "I used to work for a small firm in Seattle before moving east," he said. "That firm was a subcontractor for Morgan Construction." I looked at him, silent. "Specifically, on a development near Lake Washington, I was handling the initial environmental surveys. During a meeting, I discovered the soil quality report had been altered after it was signed." His voice dropped, steady as a drill's rhythm. I asked the project lead. He didn't deny it. He just said it was an adjustment to fit the budget. A week later, I was reassigned. Official reason: lack of flexibility. I didn't need to ask who that lead was. Ethan had overseen the Lake Washington project back then. I remembered it clearly. My father had even told me Ethan was finally starting to understand financial strategy. "Do you still have the original copy?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. Jordan nodded. "I scanned everything before leaving the company. It's been years, and I never knew if I should do anything with them. But if you need them now, I'm willing to share." I stared at him, a mix of shock and gratitude rising. "Why?" I asked softly. "Why tell me now?" "Because I see you're done with silence, and I believe people who dare to speak deserve someone standing beside them." That afternoon, I returned to Harper's apartment, carrying Jordan's documents and something else entirely: the sense that I was no longer alone on the path toward justice and freedom. Harper was sitting on the floor, sketching a new mug. Design. She looked up as I walked in, noticing the papers in my hand. "I'm guessing things are about to get interesting?" she asked, half serious, half curious. I smiled, setting the stack down, my eyes steady. "Not just interesting, Harper. Clear." The invitation arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in a thick envelope, my name embossed in silver ink on ivory paper. I held it for a long time, already guessing what was inside before opening it. The engagement party of Ethan Morgan and Clara Jennings, to be held at a Vermont resort, an intimate gathering for family and close friends. Inside was a handwritten note from my mother. My dear daughter, your father and I truly hope you'll come. Don't let small misunderstandings damage the bonds of blood. We can talk, resolve everything peacefully. Ethan has grown. He needs you by his side. I held the note like someone turning a familiar knife in her hand. Soft words, sweetly written, but aimed straight at the weak spot. They had never once apologized, but they were experts at dressing their actions in the language of love. That evening, I set the invitation on the kitchen table while Harper washed glasses and Jordan scrolled through maps of the resort on his phone. "You're really going to go?" Harper asked, drying her hands with a towel. "I need to face them," I replied, my voice neither low nor raised. Jordan set his phone down, looking at me through his glasses. "If you're going, don't go empty-handed." I nodded slightly. "I'll bring everything." We sat together. The documents David Traynor had given me were carefully organized. Spreadsheets, wire transfers, shell company names, shady receipts. Jordan had even highlighted the technical details that Ethan couldn't deny his own signature was on them. Harper was quiet for a while, then asked, "You're planning to expose your brother in front of everyone?" "I don't want to humiliate anyone, but I won't let them keep performing a play where I'm cast as the villain." 2 days later, I drove to Vermont. Early spring air was thin, the scent of pine blowing through the car window as I passed rolling hills. The resort was secluded, a line of small villas facing a clear lake. They placed me in a separate cottage, away from the family. I arrived at the main hall at 4 p.m., just as the engagement was starting. Soft string music played in the corner, everything decorated in white and silver, exactly my mother's style. Ethan stood in the center, holding Clara's hand, both of them radiant under golden lights. My parents stood nearby, pride glowing across their faces. I stepped inside, and the room seemed to falter for a beat. My mother froze for an instant. My father gave a curt nod, as if trying to bury his unease beneath a calm expression. Ethan looked at me, lips curling in a faint smile, but his eyes sharp with caution. I nodded to everyone but didn't rush forward. I chose a table near the window in the back, a spot where I could observe everything without being pulled into the whirlpool of ceremony. An hour later, when the dinner began, my father stepped up to the microphone, gently tapping the side of his glass. The room slowly quieted. "Before we raise our glasses to celebrate Ethan and Clara, I want to take a moment to talk about family," he began, his voice warm, as if reciting a speech he had rehearsed. "I know that in any family there can be disagreements, but blood is something you cannot deny. Family is the place we always return to, no matter the storms. And today, I am happy because my daughter Kinsley has come back." All eyes turned toward me. My father smiled, giving a small wave. I stood, walking forward calmly, as though each step was guided by something flowing from deep within. I took the microphone he handed me, scanning the room. Someone had turned off the music. Clara gripped Ethan's hand tighter. My mother stood behind them, her face slightly tense with unease. "Thank you for welcoming me today," I began, my voice steady. "I also believe family is a place where people deserve to be heard, not only when they obey, but also when they dare to ask questions." The air froze. I opened my bag and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were the documents Jordan had helped me prepare. "I brought something that needs to be clarified, not to ruin this day, but to prevent mistakes from continuing under the name of family." I unfolded the pages and handed them to the MC so he could pass them to members of the family. These are financial records tied to a shell company Ethan used to withdraw money from my parents' business. Nearly $300,000 disappeared from the project fund, transferred into a personal account under Capstone Ventures, a company Ethan indirectly controls. Ethan rushed forward, his face flushed. "What are you doing? This is my engagement party. And you're using it to legitimize a false image," I replied, not breaking my gaze from him. My mother panicked, stepping up. "That's enough. This can be resolved later." Then, why did I receive a lawyer's notice, demanding repayment of shares I never received? Why did you allow my brother to post insinuations online to destroy my reputation? I turned to the guests. I stayed silent for years. And in that silence, people like Ethan were celebrated as successful. People like me were labeled as trouble. My father snatched a sheet from the MC, scanning it. His face paled. Meanwhile, Jordan, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward, holding an additional file. "I'm an engineer who worked on a project Ethan oversaw. I confirm I was pushed off the team after discovering the environmental report had been altered. All records are authentic." The room filled with murmurs. Some relatives stood, whispering to one another. No one was laughing. No one lifted a glass. I closed the envelope, setting it on the table in front of Ethan. "I didn't come here to humiliate you. I came to reclaim my voice and to show everyone that the truth cannot be hidden forever." I turned to leave before anyone could stop me. Through the large windows, snow had begun to fall lightly. But inside me, everything was clear. Nothing from the past could hold me anymore. I had barely stepped off the stage when Ethan's voice rang out behind me, high and unsteady. "You think you're so smart? Try being CEO and see if you can survive before acting superior." I stopped, slowly turning back. The entire room held its breath. Ethan strode into the center, his face burning red, chin raised. "You always think you've been abandoned, while Mom and Dad carried an entire company, and you lectured from behind a desk. That money was necessary to keep clients. Everyone does it." The final words fell like a hammer. Silence gripped the room. For a moment, the air was thick. An aunt near me gasped. "Oh my God." Clara tried to tug his arm, but he shook her off. "If they want to call off the engagement, let them. Everyone's fake anyway." A few guests pulled out their phones. I saw the small flashes of cameras from the back of the room. The murmurs swelled like waves. My father hurried onto the stage, his voice trembling but forced calm. "Everyone, please, let's stay calm. The documents Kinsley presented haven't been verified. This is just a family misunderstanding." He turned to me, his thin smile exposing the strain. "We shouldn't air private matters in public." I locked eyes with him. "Then why did you hire lawyers to demand repayment for shares that never existed? Why allow Ethan to smear me on social media?" Before he could answer, a man with salt and pepper hair stood from a table near the window. His voice rang out steady. "My name is Richard Blake, CEO of Larkin and Blake, where Kinsley now works. I don't mean to intrude on family matters, but since I am also an investor in a previous joint project with Morgan Construction, I feel obligated to clarify." All heads turned toward him. My mother clutched my father's sleeve. Ethan stepped back. "I reviewed the reports Ethan submitted for the West Seattle housing project last year," Richard continued. "There were discrepancies then, but without solid proof, we kept it internal. Now, with the documents Kinsley presented, I have reason to believe it's far more serious." He paused, his gaze sweeping across Ethan. "We have recorded this event from the start for internal communications, as is standard when partners are present. Ethan's entire outburst has been captured on video." A shockwave rippled through the room. Some guests slipped out of their seats. Others whispered, exchanging uneasy glances. Clara sat frozen, head in her hands, unable to believe what she had heard. My father moved toward Richard, his voice low but stiff. I'm sure I can explain. Richard cut him off. I won't discuss this further here. We'll forward the video and documents to legal counsel. If necessary, we'll work with independent auditors. Ethan spun toward my mother. Why aren't you doing anything? Standing there, crying won't fix it. She stepped back, her eyes blurred with tears, but said nothing. My father stood frozen, as if his whole body had turned to ice in the cold of March. I stepped down from the stage, heading straight toward Harper and Jordan near the entrance. Jordan handed me my coat. Harper clasped my wrist. You okay? I'm not sure. I breathed deeply. But I don't regret it. Jordan nodded. Ethan just confirmed everything in front of nearly 100 people. There's video. There are witnesses. The rest will be up to the law. I turned for one last look at the room where it had all begun, the place I once dreamed of standing as the daughter finally recognized. Now, I saw only chaos. Flowers toppled, wine spilled across linens, and whispers rising nonstop. No one lifted a glass. No one smiled. I stepped outside, snowflakes drifting into my hair. The air was cold, but pure. The ashen sky opened into a quiet space for what truly mattered. Jordan opened the car door. Harper sat in the back, her phone buzzing nonstop. The story's already online, she said. A financial journalist recognized Richard Blake and posted the clip of him confirming. There's even a video of Ethan shouting, "Everyone does it." The headline reads, Morgan Construction heir admits to using company funds for personal gain during engagement party. I looked out the window. Snow still fell slowly, but I no longer felt the chill. For the first time in my life, I stood at the center of something collapsing, and I wasn't the victim. I was the one ending it. Not with noise, not with bitterness, simply with truth. A week after the broken engagement, Ethan vanished from social media. The cryptic posts, staged photos, and endless congratulations disappeared overnight. Financial media began digging into shady expenses tied to Capstone Ventures. Some investors who had backed Morgan Construction publicly demanded independent audits. Within just 10 days, the company's interim board forced Ethan to step down from all executive roles and froze his financial access. They issued a public statement claiming it was to facilitate a more transparent restructuring. I read the news that Monday morning in the Larkin and Blake conference room. Richard gave me a small nod as the internal update ended, a subtle but profound acknowledgement. We also just received notice from Morgan Construction, he said. They've suspended all collaborations and are considering selling off some unfinished projects. I quietly made a note in my planner. There was nothing to celebrate, but something inside me stilled like a lake after a storm. By the end of the month, I received an email from the business division. My design team had been chosen to lead the Southgate commercial redevelopment project, valued at nearly $60 million. My proposal integrating vertical green spaces with low-energy architecture had impressed Boston City Council. When Harper heard, she hugged me in front of the third-floor printer, squealing like a child. See? I told you. When you're no longer held down, nothing's impossible. I smiled. Not from pride, but because, for the first time, it felt like something truly right was beginning from my own hands. Jordan was waiting in the lobby that day. The rain had just stopped, droplets still clinging to the shoulders of his pale gray coat. Congratulations, he said simply, without embellishment. Thank you, I replied, meeting his eyes with a sudden lightness. Want to have dinner? He asked. Not for work. Just because I want to sit with you without a laptop between us. I tilted my head. Do you even know how to cook? He smiled. Maybe not as well as I analyze ecosystems, but well enough not to poison anyone. That evening, we ate at his apartment, a cozy space with soft golden lights, monochrome landscape paintings on the wall, and bookshelves packed with ecology texts. He made a simple pasta with creamy mushroom sauce, delicious in its modesty, and poured me a glass of red wine he said he only opened when there was someone worth sharing it with. I sat on the sofa, holding the round pillow he said his mother had sewn by hand. Jordan sat beside me, not saying much. Every now and then, he looked at me and smiled as if every question in the world already had its answer. "Have you ever thought about starting over?" I asked quietly. "I have," he said, pouring a bit more wine. "When I was pushed off a project for speaking up, it felt like everything collapsed. But then I moved. Started. Again, rebuilt my reputation by quietly doing the work well every single day." I turned to him. "Were you ever afraid?" "Yes." He nodded. "But there's something scarier than fear, continuing to live in silence." I set my glass down on the table. The room sank into a silence deep enough for us to hear each other's breaths. "I want to stand with you," he said slowly. "Not just on projects, but on the days when you're not sure you can keep going. No matter how many times you have to rebuild yourself, I'll still be here." I didn't answer right away, but inside, something long frozen began to crack, melting into warmth. Not because of his words, but because of how he looked at me, as though I deserved to be chosen, not out of duty, not out of blood, but simply because I was me. The next morning, I received an email from an old address. Morgan, family, office at. Short, no greeting. "The bank is freezing company assets. We need your support." "Dad," I turned off the screen. No reply, no anger, no pity. I was no longer the one who ran back when called, no longer waiting to be acknowledged. That afternoon, I printed the newest design for Southgate. At its heart, between the modern towers, was an elliptical central garden where natural light was drawn in through reflective glass walls. In the project description, I wrote a single line: "Every space can be reborn if people dare to dismantle flawed foundations." I folded the print, slid it into the presentation folder, then stood, gazing out through the tall glass windows where Boston's sunset stretched long golden lines across the streets, as if someone were redrawing the boundaries of a city and a life. Snow fell softly outside the glass. Boston slipped into winter under heavy coats, golden lights trailing down the streets like old memories illuminated once more. I stood in my apartment, the place where I had chosen every piece of furniture, mounted every hook, cleaned alone on that first night, when everything smelled of fresh wood and the future was still empty. 1 year, and it felt as though a lifetime had passed. This Christmas, I wasn't in my parents' mansion in Connecticut, not eating dinner prepared by a private chef, not listening to comparisons or enduring scornful glances. I sat in my 11th floor apartment overlooking the Charles River, gathered with Harper, Jordan, 3 close colleagues, and little Clara, my 10-year-old neighbor, who loved to draw and always called me the architect lady. The table was simple but warm. White candles flickered, reflecting light on the watercolor Harper had painted and hung on the west wall. Jordan wore the olive green sweater I had given him, the cuffs still dusted with cookie flour. I poured hot apple cider for everyone and sat, touching the small ceramic vase in the center, an object without material value, yet the most important piece of all to me. I had shaped it on a Saturday afternoon, in the pottery class Harper dragged me to after a long week. At first, the clay was shapeless, soft, and weak, no different from how I felt then. But with each spin of the wheel, each adjustment of my hands, each crack trimmed and smoothed with water, it began to take form. Not perfect, slightly crooked, leaning a bit, but it was mine. No one had given it to me, no one touched it but me. Clara pointed at the vase, tilting her head. "Miss Kinsley, why isn't it straight like the ones at my house?" I smiled, brushing her hair. "Because this one, I made myself. It doesn't look like anyone else's." And that's what makes it special. Harper raised her glass. Here's to things imperfect but true. The clinking of glasses echoed. I sipped, the sweet warmth sliding down my throat. Peace didn't come from quietness, but from no longer avoiding anything. The evening passed with laughter and music. As everyone tidied up, I opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of Christmas cards. One had no name on the envelope, but I recognized the handwriting as soon as I flipped it open. Tilted, careful, my name written slightly to the right, just as it had always been, a card from my mother. Inside, only a few lines. This winter is colder than most. We are growing older and beginning to understand what we once thought unnecessary. If you are willing, we'd like to see you again. Not to explain, only to listen. I sat in silence. My heart didn't twist the way it once did, nor tremble with anger. Only a calm stillness remained. I picked up a pen, wrote a line on the back, then slipped it into a new envelope, addressed to the old house. If you truly want to see me, come as people who have learned to listen without conditions, without expectations. If not, I will still be fine, and I will still live the way I choose. I sealed it, leaving it by the door. Harper looked at me from behind, saying nothing. She understood. Jordan was at the sink washing glasses, occasionally whistling along to the Christmas music on the radio. The air seemed to soften. I returned to the table, adjusting the vase so the light struck it just right. It was no longer just a craft, it was a symbol, an object shaped by my hands, just as I had learned to shape myself out of fragments and disorder. No one else had the right to define my worth. No one could use blood ties to bind my existence in another's shadow. I didn't need permission to live fully, and I no longer needed belated recognition. What I needed and already had was self-respect, steadiness, and people willing to walk beside me on their own strong feet. Christmas, Boston, a small apartment filled with gentle music. I sat there, fingers brushing the crooked little vase with pride, grateful I hadn't let go of what I believed was right. It wasn't victory, it was peace, and I had made it myself. If you're still listening now and feel something stir inside you, maybe empathy, maybe old memories rushing back, I hope you'll share your thoughts. Have you ever been where I was? When the people closest to you forced you to step away to learn how to exist alone, only for you to finally redefine your worth, not by titles or bloodlines, but by the life you bravely chose? I believe each of us has our own ceramic vase, something crooked, imperfect, yet carrying the marks of effort, of tears, of choices. Leave a comment below if you'd like to share your story or your reflections on this journey. I'd truly love to read and listen. And if this story gave you something to think about, don't forget to follow the channel to continue with me in the next stories. Honest pieces about family, about wounds, and about hope. Because sometimes what makes us strong isn't being protected, but daring to walk away from the place that no longer belongs to us.